never thought I'd hear words that would permanently fracture my family come out of my own mother's mouth. My daughter was only 13, eager, proud, exhausted in the way only a child trying to prove herself can be. For 6 long weeks, she worked every single day, believing she was building something meaningful. What she didn't know was that the adults she trusted most were quietly teaching her a brutal lesson about worth, control, and betrayal. That day changed everything, for her and for me. Amelia had always believed that family agreements, even the informal ones, carried more weight than contracts signed in ink. Growing up, her mother had drilled into her the idea that blood meant loyalty, that promises made across kitchen tables were sacred, and that trust was the glue that held generations together. So when her mother suggested that Amelia's 13-year-old daughter help out with her small home-based business, it didn't sound like a risk. It sounded like an opportunity wrapped in affection. Her mother framed it as a chance for the girl to learn responsibility, discipline, and pride in earning something with her own hands. And Amelia listened with the quiet confidence of someone who had no reason yet to doubt. The business itself was modest but busy. Handmade products, customer messages at all hours, orders to be packed, supplies to be sorted. Amelia's mother spoke about it with the seriousness of a full-time operation, often complaining about how overwhelmed she felt. She said having her granddaughter around would make things easier and would give the girl something productive to do during her school break. The promise of payment was mentioned casually, almost as an afterthought, but it was there. "Of course she'll be paid," her mother said, waving her hand dismissively as if the idea of not paying her hadn't even crossed her mind. Amelia didn't ask how much or when. It felt unnecessary. This was her mother. This was family. Her daughter, excited by the idea of being trusted with real work, immediately agreed. At 13, she was at that fragile age where approval mattered deeply, especially from elders she admired. She wanted to prove she was capable, grown enough to be taken seriously. Amelia watched her beam with pride as her grandmother explained tasks and responsibilities, using words like important and needed. The girl took it all in, nodding earnestly, already imagining what it would feel like to earn her first money, to contribute rather than just receive. There was no written agreement, no clear schedule, no boundaries laid out. Everything rested on assumption and goodwill. Amelia told herself this was normal, that families didn't need paperwork to do right by each other. Her mother had raised 2 daughters, after all. She had always emphasized values over money, respect over profit. Letting her daughter work for her grandmother felt safe, even wholesome, like a continuation of the same family values Amelia had grown up with. As the first week began, Amelia noticed how seriously her daughter took the role. She woke up early without being asked, dressed neatly, and kept a small notebook where she wrote down instructions her grandmother gave her. She spoke about the work at dinner, explaining how she helped organize orders or answered simple customer questions under supervision. Amelia felt a quiet pride listening to her, a mother's satisfaction in seeing her child step into responsibility with enthusiasm rather than resistance. Her mother's praise reinforced that sense of trust. She often told Amelia how helpful the girl was, how smart, how lucky Amelia was to have such a cooperative child. Each compliment acted like a seal of reassurance, smoothing over any lingering doubt. When Amelia briefly mentioned payment timelines, her mother brushed it off again, saying there was plenty of time and that the girl was learning something far more valuable than money anyway. Amelia didn't push. She interpreted those words as philosophical, not literal. At no point did Amelia imagine that the promise itself was fragile, or that the definition of helping family might quietly shift once the work was already being done. Because in her mind, trust was not something you renegotiated after the fact, it was something you honored instinctively, especially when it involved a child who believed every word spoken to her, especially when that word came from someone she loved and respected, especially when the entire arrangement was built on the simple idea that family never takes advantage of its own. By the second week, what had begun as a light, almost symbolic contribution quietly transformed into something far more demanding, though no one ever announced the change out loud. Amelia noticed it first in small ways. The way her daughter no longer lingered over breakfast, the way she checked her grandmother's messages before even packing her school bag, the way her shoulders seemed tense even when she was sitting still. The work was no longer an occasional help. It had settled into a routine that expected her presence every day, sometimes for hours at a stretch. Amelia told herself this was just the adjustment period. That responsibility often felt heavier before it felt rewarding. The tasks multiplied quickly. At first, her daughter had been organizing supplies and assisting under supervision, but soon she was responding to customer inquiries on her own, carefully copying the tone her grandmother used, afraid of making mistakes. She learned how to package orders properly, how to label shipments, how to keep track of payments and inventory. There were moments when she felt proud of being trusted with such things, but there were also moments when the weight of it all made her quiet. Amelia noticed how her daughter stopped talking about what she was learning and started talking about what she hadn't finished yet. By the third week, the hours stretched longer. What was once just a couple of hours became entire afternoons, then evenings. Weekends disappeared almost entirely. When Amelia suggested her daughter take a break or go out with friends, the girl hesitated, glancing at her phone, worried about unfinished tasks or missed messages. She didn't want to disappoint her grandmother. She didn't want to seem lazy or ungrateful. The desire to prove herself kept her going, even when her energy ran low, and Amelia, watching from the sidelines, felt a growing unease she couldn't yet name. Her mother continued to praise the girl, but the praise shifted in tone. It became less about appreciation and more about expectation. "She knows how I like things done now," she would say. "I depend on her." Those words lodged themselves uncomfortably in Amelia's mind. Dependence was a heavy thing to place on a 13-year-old, but each time Amelia considered speaking up, she reminded herself that this was temporary, that payment was coming, that the experience would balance out the effort in the end. Daniel noticed it too. He mentioned how tired the girl looked, how she barely touched her dinner some nights. He asked simple questions: how many hours she was working, whether she was still enjoying it, and Amelia found herself giving vague answers. She didn't want to assume the worst of her own mother. She didn't want to create tension over something that might resolve itself naturally. Family, she believed, deserved patience before accusation. As weeks 4 and 5 passed, the exhaustion became harder to ignore. Amelia's daughter developed headaches, complained of sore hands, and sometimes fell asleep with her notebook still open beside her bed. The excitement that had once fueled her effort was replaced by a quiet sense of obligation. She no longer spoke about the money she thought she was earning. Instead, she spoke about deadlines, about customers who were waiting, about how her grandmother would be stressed if she didn't finish something on time. Amelia tried again to bring up the subject of payment, framing it gently, almost apologetically, but her mother brushed it aside with comments about how busy things were, how finances were tight at the moment, how it was good for the girl to learn patience and humility. The conversation never lingered long enough to turn into an argument. It slipped away every time, leaving Amelia with a growing knot in her chest and a feeling that something essential was being avoided. By the 6th week, the pattern was fully set. The work was expected, the hours were assumed, and the promise that had once been spoken so casually now hovered in the background, unacknowledged and undefined. Amelia watched her daughter push through each day out of loyalty and fear of letting someone down, and she began to realize that silence in this situation was not neutral, because every day that passed without clarity quietly reinforced the idea that effort did not require fairness, that trust did not guarantee protection, and that a child's willingness to give could be stretched far beyond what anyone had originally admitted out loud. The moment of truth arrived without ceremony, slipping into the day as casually as the promise had been made weeks earlier. Amelia hadn't planned a confrontation. She simply asked in a calm, measured tone when her daughter could expect to be paid, framing it as a practical question rather than an accusation. 6 weeks had passed, school was about to resume, and her daughter had started talking about saving money for something she wanted badly. Amelia assumed the answer would be vague but reassuring, perhaps a delay, perhaps an explanation, but still rooted in fairness. Her mother's response was immediate and sharp, stripping the warmth from the room in an instant. She scoffed as though the question itself were unreasonable and said they weren't paying the girl anything. Not now, not later, not at all. She explained it with a dismissive certainty that left no room for misunderstanding, saying the work was helping family, that payment had never been serious, and that the girl should be grateful for the experience instead of expecting money. Amelia felt the words hit her like a physical force, each one heavier than the last, reshaping everything she thought she understood about the last 6 weeks. What made it worse was the timing. Amelia's daughter was nearby, not fully in the room, but close enough to hear fragments of the conversation. When her grandmother raised her voice slightly, irritation bleeding into her tone, the girl froze. Amelia saw it happen in real time, the way her daughter's posture stiffened, the way her face lost its color, the way her eyes darted between the two adults she trusted most. There was no dramatic outburst, no immediate tears, just a quiet, stunned stillness that was far more devastating. Amelia tried to clarify, hoping there had been some misunderstanding, reminding her mother of the earlier assurances, the casual promises made at the beginning. Her mother waved them away, insisting that Amelia had misinterpreted things, that she had never meant it like that. The implication was clear. Amelia was being unreasonable, greedy even, for expecting a child's labor to be compensated simply because it had been discussed. The ease with which her mother rewrote the past unsettled her more than the refusal itself. Sophia, Amelia's sister, stepped in then, not to mediate, but to reinforce their mother's stance. She laughed lightly as if to soften the blow, saying that kids these days expected too much, that a little hard work without reward built character. She suggested that Amelia was overreacting, that turning this into a money issue was unnecessary and embarrassing. Amelia looked at her sister, searching for some sign of discomfort or doubt, but found none. The agreement between them felt rehearsed, as though this outcome had been decided long before Amelia ever asked the question. Their father sat quietly, eyes fixed on the table, saying nothing. His silence felt louder than the other's words. Amelia had always known him as someone who avoided conflict, who believed problems resolved themselves if left alone long enough. In that moment, his refusal to speak felt like a choice, a tacit endorsement of what was being said. Amelia realized then that she was alone in the room, standing between her child and a group of adults who had collectively decided that fairness was optional. Her daughter finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper, asking if she had done something wrong. The question cut through Amelia with a precision she would never forget. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about worth. It was about a child trying to understand how 6 weeks of effort could suddenly be reframed as something she should never have expected recognition for. Amelia saw confusion give way to shame, as if her daughter were blaming herself for believing the adults around her. Anger rose in Amelia then, sharp and protective, but it was tangled with grief. This was her mother, the woman who had taught her about fairness and respect, now telling a child that her work had no value because of who she was related to. Amelia argued back, her voice shaking despite her effort to stay composed, insisting that a promise had been made, that expectations had been set, that this wasn't about entitlement, but about honesty. Her mother accused her of being dramatic, of poisoning the family dynamic, of teaching her daughter to see generosity as a transaction. The room felt smaller as the conversation spiraled, words overlapping, emotions hardening. Amelia became acutely aware of her daughter shrinking into herself, absorbing every sentence, every tone, every implication. She realized that regardless of how this ended, something had already been taken from her child, the simple belief that effort would be met with fairness, that trust would be honored, that adults did not change the rules once the work was done. The aftermath of the confrontation lingered heavily, settling into the house like a thick, unspoken fog. Amelia's daughter barely spoke on the drive home, staring out the window with an expression that was too old for her age. When Amelia finally asked how she was feeling, the girl shrugged, a small, defeated motion that hurt more than tears would have. She said she felt stupid for believing she would be paid, for thinking her work mattered, for not realizing sooner that helping family could mean being taken for granted. Each word chipped away at Amelia because she recognized the birth of a lesson she had never wanted her child to learn this way. That evening, the girl sat on her bed, carefully folding the notebook she had used to write down tasks and instructions, as if it were evidence of a mistake. She asked Amelia whether she should have worked harder, whether she had complained too much, whether that was why her grandmother decided not to pay her. Amelia reassured her again and again that none of this was her fault, that the problem lay entirely with the adults who had failed her, but reassurance struggled to compete with the reality the child had just experienced. Trust, once cracked, does not mend easily, especially when the betrayal comes from someone a child has been taught to revere. Daniel joined them later, listening quietly as Amelia explained what had happened. His jaw tightened with each detail, anger flickering beneath his calm demeanor. He spoke gently to the girl, telling her that her work had real value. That effort always mattered, even when people refused to acknowledge it. He pointed out how much responsibility she had taken on, how dependable she had been, how impressive it was for someone her age. The girl listened, but Amelia could tell his words were landing on fragile ground. Validation after the damage had been done felt like trying to repair a broken window with warm air. Over the next few days, the emotional impact deepened. Amelia's daughter became withdrawn, less eager to volunteer help, less enthusiastic about tasks she once enjoyed. She hesitated before agreeing to small favors, asking questions she had never asked before. Will I get in trouble if I say no? What happens if I can't finish? Amelia realized that her daughter had learned to associate responsibility with exploitation, effort with risk. What was meant to be a lesson in independence had twisted into a warning about overgiving. Family conversations grew strained. Amelia's mother sent messages acting as if nothing significant had happened, sharing updates about the business and asking casually when her granddaughter might come by again to help out. Each message felt like a fresh insult. Sophia echoed the same tone, suggesting everyone move on, insisting the situation had been blown out of proportion. Their refusal to acknowledge the harm only confirmed to Amelia that this was never just a misunderstanding. It was a fundamental difference in values. Amelia tried once more to speak with her father privately, hoping he might recognize the damage and step in. He listened quietly, as he always did, and admitted he had known payment was never intended. He said it was easier not to argue, easier to let things unfold. His honesty landed like another betrayal. Amelia understood then that silence in this family was not neutrality but compliance. It was a way of preserving comfort at the expense of fairness, and it had cost her daughter dearly. At night, Amelia replayed the weeks in her mind, questioning her own role in what had happened. She wondered whether she should have demanded clarity from the beginning, whether her trust had been misplaced, whether her desire to believe in family had blinded her to warning signs. The guilt was heavy, not because she had done wrong intentionally, but because she had allowed the situation to continue long after discomfort had set in. Protecting her child, she realized, sometimes meant confronting people she had been taught never to question. The hardest part was watching her daughter internalize the experience. The girl no longer spoke about wanting to earn money or learning new skills. Instead, she spoke about not wanting to owe anyone anything, about keeping favors small and manageable. Amelia saw her becoming cautious in a way that no 13-year-old should have to be. She understood then that the real cost of those 6 weeks was not unpaid labor, but the quiet reshaping of a child's understanding of trust, value, and safety within her own family. Amelia reached a point where silence felt heavier than conflict, where protecting harmony no longer justified the quiet damage being done to her child. The decision to confront her family again didn't come easily. She knew what it would cost her, how quickly she would be labeled difficult, ungrateful, or dramatic, but every time she looked at her daughter's guarded expression, the choice became clearer. This was no longer about salvaging relationships. It was about drawing a line that should have existed from the beginning. Amelia asked for a family meeting, framing it calmly, deliberately, refusing to soften the seriousness of what had happened. When they gathered, the tension was unmistakable. Amelia spoke steadily, laying out the facts without embellishment. The hours her daughter had worked, the responsibilities she had taken on, the explicit expectation of payment that had been established. She emphasized that this wasn't about money alone, but about accountability and the lesson being taught to a child who had trusted the adults around her. Her mother responded with indignation, accusing Amelia of turning a simple family favor into a transactional nightmare. She insisted that paying the girl now would set a dangerous precedent, that children should help elders out of respect, not expectation. Sophia supported her immediately, echoing the same arguments with sharper edges. She suggested Amelia was projecting her own issues onto her daughter, that kids were more resilient than Amelia gave them credit for. She laughed dismissively when Amelia mentioned the emotional impact, calling it an overreaction fueled by modern parenting trends. The ease with which they minimized the harm made Amelia's resolve harden. She realized then that they were not misunderstanding her point, they were rejecting it outright. Amelia offered a final compromise, one she hoped would allow everyone to step back without further damage. She asked that her daughter be paid what had been promised, nothing more, nothing less, and that the arrangement end immediately. She explained that this would close the chapter cleanly and allow her daughter to move forward without resentment or confusion. Her mother's refusal was immediate and absolute. She said paying now would feel like being forced, like giving in to manipulation, and she would not do it on principle. The word principle lingered in the air, hollow and sharp. Amelia felt something settle inside her then, a clarity that cut through the emotional fog of the past weeks. She told them calmly that if her daughter's work had no value to them, then her daughter's presence would no longer be available. She stated that there would be no more help, no more unpaid labor, no more access under the guise of family obligation. The reaction was swift. Accusations flew of disrespect, of breaking the family apart, of choosing money over blood. Her father finally spoke, urging Amelia to reconsider, to let things cool down, to think about long-term consequences. He warned her about regrets, about how difficult it would be to repair these relationships once they were damaged. Amelia listened, but she no longer heard concern in his words, only fear of discomfort. She replied that the long-term consequence she cared about most was what her daughter would carry with her into adulthood, the belief that her boundaries mattered, that her labor deserved respect, that love did not require self-erasure. Daniel stood beside her throughout the exchange, quiet but unwavering. When the tension escalated, he placed a hand on Amelia's arm, grounding her. Later, when voices rose and the conversation threatened to spiral further, he spoke up, stating clearly that he supported Amelia's decision completely. He said he would not allow their child to be used or dismissed under any circumstances. His calm certainty contrasted sharply with the emotional defensiveness in the room, and it made the divide unmistakable. Leaving that meeting felt like walking away from something familiar, but corrosive. Amelia felt grief, anger, and relief tangled together, each emotion pulling in a different direction. She knew the family would tell their version of the story, casting her as the antagonist, the daughter who challenged tradition, the mother who caused unnecessary division. What mattered more to her was the message her actions sent to her child, that when someone crosses a line, even someone close, it is not only acceptable but necessary to step back. That night, Amelia sat with her daughter and explained what had happened in simple, honest terms. She told her that standing up for herself had consequences, but so did staying silent, and she wanted her daughter to grow up knowing the difference. She explained that boundaries were not punishments, but protections, and that choosing dignity over approval was sometimes lonely, but always important. Her daughter listened carefully, absorbing each word, watching her mother with a seriousness that suggested understanding far beyond her years. The days that followed were quieter, but the silence felt different from before. It was no longer the tense, anticipatory quiet of waiting for someone else to decide what was fair. It was a deliberate calm, shaped by choice. Amelia could see the weight lifting from her daughter in small, gradual ways. The way she slept more deeply, the way her shoulders relaxed, the way she no longer flinched when her phone buzzed with a message. Distance from the chaos had given her space to breathe, even if the hurt still lingered beneath the surface. Amelia made a decision she hadn't planned but knew was necessary. She sat down with her daughter one afternoon and told her she was going to pay her herself. Not as a consolation prize, not as a way to erase what had happened, but as recognition of the work she had done and the effort she had given freely. She calculated the hours carefully, estimating conservatively, then doubled the amount. When she handed her daughter the money, she explained why. She said this was not charity and not pity, it was acknowledgement. It was proof that the work had mattered, even if others had refused to admit it. Her daughter held the money silently at first, unsure how to react. Amelia watched emotion flicker across her face. Confusion, relief, gratitude, and something heavier that looked like grief for the innocence she had lost. She asked why her grandmother couldn't have done this instead. Amelia answered honestly, without bitterness, explaining that sometimes people choose comfort over fairness, and that choice says more about them than about the person being wronged. She made sure her daughter understood that being family did not give anyone permission to ignore promises or exploit trust. Over time, conversations replaced assumptions. Amelia talked openly with her daughter about boundaries, about consent, about the right to say no, even when expectations were framed as obligations. They discussed how easily kindness could be taken advantage of when it wasn't protected by clarity. Amelia emphasized that generosity should never come at the cost of self-respect, and that love did not require endurance of harm. These weren't lessons Amelia had learned early in life, and she felt the weight of that realization every time she saw her daughter listening so intently.